Intelligent conversation.
Are the people there going to qualified enough to make these sort of decisions?
They took the liberties of saying, we're going to draw the line here.
This is Ottawa Today with Mark Sutcliffe on 1310 News and Rogers TV.
Elliot Tepper is with us every Wednesday on Ottawa Today to talk about the big international stories. A couple of weeks ago, he joined us by telephone from California, and my first question to him today is why he's still not there, and if he wishes he was.
This is home.
Yes, for better and for worse, on March 15th with a foot of snow on the ground. Yeah.
Well, March 15th is a good way to open up today's comment, I think. This is, the Ides of March. Mm-hmm. Beware. The Ides of March. This is the day of the daggers. And, we talk about world affairs. It's by definition gloom and doom. You very rarely get good news stories that we can chuckle over. So I was just thinking about this being the day of the daggers. Finally, something you and I have been talking about for a long time is happening. The elections are happening now in Holland. The Dutch are going to the polls. And we've talked about this a lot. The big picture, I think, connecting a lot of different stories, is that we have a real period of transition going on in a contest for what kind of future we all want to live in, or we all will be living in, whether we want to or not. We're in a transition period, and the Brexit in June and the election of Donald Trump in November brings home starkly that we may be in a period where it's a struggle right now, a contest between the order that was built up since the Second World War, the 70-year post-war consensus in the West anyway about the nature of peace, the nature of prosperity, liberal international order that is freer and freer movement of goods and people, or the sudden return of an old order. That is, the new order that's coming into shape is really a return to an older type of order altogether. The return of the nation state, of ethnic nationalism, borders going up. We have barbed wire, indeed, razor wire on some borders in Europe now. What we see is a contest between a balance of power world and spheres of influence, the old kind that led us to wars and disaster, or the post-war, which brought us the EU, peace, prosperity, promotion of democracy around the world. Those things are in the balance right now. Spheres of influence. And I see it in two parts of the world, Mark. I see it in Europe, which is very much on our mind. But of course, my home bailiwick, Asia, there's a lot going on there. But what ties them together is, are we right now in a kind of pivotal period deciding what kind of future world order we're going to have for our children?
When you put it in that context, it makes me think about whether a return to a divided Europe is not just an economic issue. That's the way it often gets covered, is that it's about less free trade, putting up more borders to the movement of people and goods. But is it also a return to the Europe of before World War II?
The EU was born out of the minds of a few political scientists who sat in libraries and said, we have to have peace now. The way do we get peace? This was all about peace and stability, transforming a cockpit of war, which had brought us two global wars, which were horrendous, into something else. And that's how the EU really began. Yes, use trade. The binding ties of commerce will, countries you trade with, you don't go to war with. That was the kind of the notion. And you expand it from a lump of coal into wider and wider and wider spheres until we finally got the EU with a common currency. So all of that is indeed in question now, starkly and suddenly and unexpectedly, because something clearly was going wrong. And a lot of people were left out by globalization. A lot of political leadership clearly was not focusing on what's it do to the people on the ground. And they were feeling bypassed. They were feeling manipulated. And 2008, I think, was underestimated. A corrosive global, it was really a depression. And it was, by skin of our teeth, we ended up calling it a Great Recession. Well, that had a lot of effect on the ground, and nobody went to jail. So there's a sense of unfairness as well on top. So the elites had let everybody down, led us into depression, and nobody paid a cost. So all of that wraps up into what we see today, which you and I talked about during the primaries. This is a revolt of the masses, and this is the day of the dispossessed. Well, where's it going to go? Yeah. And that's why I think we're into a pivotal period now, because right now, today, as we're sitting here, the Dutch are voting, and the elections Results will be known tonight, tomorrow. Well, won't know the new government for weeks, maybe months, because of all the parties involved. What we have is
because of coalition governments,
yes,
that type of thing. Yeah.
Well, because they have something like 26 or 28 parties.
Yeah.
It's always coalition government. How do you get from a 20% vote, which will give you the most seats in the parliament, to having a 51% coalition? As we know.
But do you have a sense of which way it's leaning right now in the Netherlands? Or
yes, I do. I think it's leaning in totally unpredictable ways because the polls are all over the place, and the polls have been spectacularly wrong on questions of populism, on questions of the rise of the right. So
there's still a scenario where a very protectionist, populist kind of government could emerge in the Netherlands.
We don't know about the government.
Yeah.
But surely the politics of Europe are being shifted to the right by this rise of anti-immigrant, anti-EU, anti-fear of the other. Let's fall back basically on ethnic nationalism and close our borders. Let's get out of the EU. So all of that's happening. And the test case right now, the first of a series of elections, and we've talked about this over and over, is happening finally today, where Wilder is likely to come in with the most seats, or maybe not. The Christian Democrats are actually coming up, surprisingly, and a party on the left. So polarization inside Holland is going to affect the rest of the dominoes which are coming. We have in France already the mainstream parties have moved far to the right. François Fillon was supposed to be, the great champion to stop Marine Le Pen, who is surging in the polls on the same rhetoric: anti-foreigner, anti-immigrant, anti-EU, close the borders, let's take back France for ourselves. And after that, we have Germany in the fall. And there's other elections across Europe. So what happens today will tell us whether the surge of right-wing populism, we should talk about this a bit, is going to continue to throw off the old order, or is it going to be stopped now in Holland? And will we have a chance that the old order the order we've come used to for 70 years might prevail?
Meanwhile, Britain is moving forward with Brexit. There was an important vote in the House of Commons this week, and Scotland is going in the opposite direction. I think it's reasonable to expect that there will be another referendum on Scottish independence, and that if it goes ahead, that Scotland will vote to break with Britain and stay with the EU.
What we have is a fascinating case. You and I have been following Brexit right from the beginning. Brexit was a real bellwether that kicked off all of this. It preceded the election of Donald Trump, and it was all around, Britain first. And for all of the elites said, no, of course we're going to stay in Europe. And they were very severely surprised and overthrown. Yes, the bell has been rung. Parliament has said in Britain, yes, we're invoking Article 50. We have the 2-year period about to start. It hasn't started quite yet. And in 2 years, the negotiation will be over. Britain will be out. And Theresa May gave a speech that could have been written by the leader of the Leave. She was a supporter of stay. But she's come to power, and she said, today Britain takes back its sovereignty, its control over its borders, the control over its decision-making, and we will be a global country. Well, there may be a global country, but they may be without Scotland, because the Scottish, who voted 55% to reject separation last time, voted overwhelmingly in that Brexit election to stay in Europe. And so I think the price of oil will help determine a great deal, and whether Britain can jiggle with the borders so Scotland keeps control over what it considers its oil. But there's a lot of that's going to go out under the radar. What we will have now is the possible breakup of the EU because of Britain's withdrawal and because of the elections we are seeing, which are all let's stay in Europe and let's get out of Europe. And in the case of the UK, will the UK stay, the UK, united? Right. We have Scotland saying at the same time as the Brexit vote, at that time, 2 years from now, we want a referendum, or a year from now, a year and a half from now, we want a referendum. And don't forget, the Irish question, thank you for Brexit, has been reopened in British politics.
Nobody wants to go there again.
Well, when you vote to get out of the EU and parts of the United Kingdom don't want to stay united, then it opens up the whole question of the future of the Emerald Isle.
We have much more ground to cover, including North Korea. There's, as we talked about last week, lots of uses of the word cyber in international stories this week. And there's Donald Trump's tax returns as well. We'll touch on that briefly coming up with Elliot Tepper of Carleton University, who is with us every Wednesday on Ottawa Today.
You're listening to Ottawa Today with Mark Sutcliffe on 1310 News and Rogers TV. Mark will be right back.